Syracuse and Johns Hopkins, two historic programs that stand as the pillars of the college lacrosse world. For the Orange, this game means a little more right now. 2 overtime top 10 losses this season. The Blue Jays stand as another chance to secure a major win. But Hopkins won't make that easy. A Blue Jays team with 5 straight wins and the 7th best scoring defense in the country stands as a true test for the Orange. In their first game away from the Dome, it's a top 10 matchup. Cuse and Johns Hopkins on Cuse Countdown, and it starts right now.
Welcome into the CitrusTV studio. It's Cuse Countdown time. Caleb Nice, Ryan Bridges, and Hudson Ridley. Syracuse and Johns Hopkins clashing in the Crown Lacrosse Classic down in Charlotte. For the Cuse, it marks the first game away from home. The Orange actually the only D1 team who hasn't had a game away from home yet. We're going to soak it in. Let's stay at home a little longer. Last weekend in the Dome, Syracuse topped High Point in a 19-12 win. It was a really strong start for Syracuse, Hudson, before we saw some struggles against a non-conference opponent. What did you take away from that one?
Well, I didn't really take much away from Syracuse in terms of a positive sense. Obviously, this game was a little bit closer than you'd like. At certain points, High Point was only 1 goal away from Syracuse at one point, and that's not a good sign for a team that's supposed to be a top 5, top 10 contender like they really want to be. Now, Syracuse did show some fight in a 7-goal run they had in the third. It's 6 goals in under 2 minutes, Ryan. That was pretty impressive, but other than that, I did see some flaws in this team that you gotta hope don't carry on later in the season.
They let free runners get into 5 yards away from the goal, Hudson, and that was a big problem. Van Overbeek, he was killing the Orange all day long. He got there, he sat to the X, and he facilitated for others. Johns Hopkins has a lot of those types of guys. Jack Angelis is going to give them a lot of problems on Saturday if they don't clean up some of the mistakes that they had against High Point.
Yeah, you see Van Overbeek there, 5 goals, 4 assists on the day. And Brennan Maia, one of the best players on that team, one of the most underrated players in the nation, 4 goals against this Syracuse defense. Now, Syracuse did tighten up in the first quarter and then again in the fourth quarter, but those middle quarters, Caleb, were a little bit concerning. Joey Spallina, though, 7 goals, 2 assists. That was a career-high 7 goals. Caleb.
That was big for Syracuse. Another thing we saw in the win, we saw some changes at the face-off X. Here's what head coach Gary Gait had to say after the game.
We're looking at the numbers and how they've been playing, and Johnny Mullen's been doing a great job for us, and we just thought, we got to get him some more time and give him a chance to see if he can continue to do what he's been doing, and he did a great job today, so we were extremely happy with him, and we'll probably continue like that for a while.
All right, so on a tough day at the face-off X, Mason Cone didn't have as big of a part as he usually does, just 9 for 18. When he's had 11 or more face-offs won in every game before Saturday, that opened the door for freshman John Mullen to step in the spotlight. Ryan, he had the best collegiate game, going 11 of 18 on restarts, 9 ground balls, and his first career goal. Does this shake up how you see the face-off position at all?
I think on Saturday you will see something a little different, Caleb. I do think you will see Johnny Mullen at the face-off dot more than Mason Cone. 11 face-off wins for Mullen, 9 for Cone, and they had the same amount against High Point. You see it right there. And throughout the entire season, Johnny Mullen, 65%, Mason Cone, 63%, Hudson. This face-off dot, we saw it. It completely changed the High Point game, and they needed to have it on point because they lost that battle to Army, and they lost that battle to Maryland as well.
But it was barely to Army and Maryland. Cone still held his own, and from my angle, it kind of seemed like something was a little wrong with Cone in that High Point game. Now, obviously, you can't speculate anything that was wrong, but he looked a little slow. He looked a little behind the play. He wasn't clamping as fast, and he wasn't running as fast when he clamped well. So I don't think we take too much away from this Johnny Mullen good day at the X, 11 of 18. All we take away is that he's good for the future. But at this point right now, you got to go with your more experienced guy.
But Gary Gait said it after the game that they've been looking at the numbers and they've been seeing that Johnny Mullen has been winning more face-offs. He had 6% of the face-offs against Maryland. He took 25% against Army, and then they got up to 50% against High Point. The numbers are going up and up and up.
Sure, but against a team like Hopkins, you really can't throw a freshman out there to get eaten up at that point. I really just don't see it, right?
Okay.
Well, Gary Gates definitely going to have decisions to make on Saturday at the Face-Off X. Last week against Army, Joey Spallina was held scoreless for just the second time in his career. Then he channeled his inner boomerang, bounced back with a 9-point outing against the Panthers, including 7 goals. Hudson, the New Yorker, had made his mark in a handful of games this season, but against those ranked teams, Spallina has disappeared. Just 5 points to show for against ranked teams.
It's not Spallina's fault, though. And I think this is the thing that we get a little confused on, Ryan, especially when you consider that Spallina, it's one of the best recruits Syracuse has gotten in forever. He wears number 22 for a reason. But his game is not to be a high-level goal scorer. And I know that goes against him having 7 goals last time out against High Point, but he's a facilitator. When they played Maryland and when they played Army, they locked Spallina down by face-guarding him at X, and then they played really well-constructed zones that shut down the middle of the field right in front of net. No passes were made into the slot from Spallina, and it really forced him to do things he ordinarily wouldn't. You think back to that overtime, Spallina had a behind-the-back shot a couple feet out from cage, and it missed completely. That set the Orange on a terrible trajectory for the rest of the game.
Yeah, but you got to get this guy moving in space. That's the key. And when he's a little bit more stagnant, he's a bit of a smaller guy. He's listed at 5'11". A lot of defenders that he goes up against are 6 foot, 6'1". You also mentioned it. He's taking the top defender every single game. Against Maryland, it was Ajax Zapatello. Against Army, it was AJ Pilot. Against Hopkins, one of the best cover guys in the nation is Chase Smith. You'll expect to see him on Spallina when the Orange and Blue Jays go at it on Sunday.
And when the Orange can't call on Spallina, a lot of other guys have stepped up. The midfielders have been chipping in. While Spallina was scoring against High Point, guys like Leo, Burtwhistle, and Stevens all had 2 points. But who do you see stepping up against Hopkins on Saturday, Ryan?
I think it's going to be Christian Muley. I mean, this guy has been taking a lot of the load away from Joey Spallina, but those two have such great chemistry. They've known each other since 3rd grade, so you know that the chemistry is really good. And Joey Spallina, we know he's the guy that's at the X most of the time for Syracuse. You saw a little bit more against High Point. In order to get Spallina off of the ball, you put Christian Muley at X, and he's that same sort of facilitator, and that's how he's been able to rack up hat tricks, especially against Army.
It's important to have that other attacker in there, but in terms of the midfield, Ryan, I have to look at Jackson Burtwhistle as a guy that I think is going to step up in the goal-scoring category. Jackson Burtwhistle right now, 49 career goals. Guess how many assists? Zero career assists. He has 49 career goals and 0 career assists. And then you look at a guy like Sam English, incredibly dynamic athlete, really fast feet, cuts in very well. Luke Roa underrated. Jake Stevens is gritty, he impacts the game. And Sam Alexo is one of the best long pole shooters in the entire country. This midfield is stacked and it doesn't get enough credit. I'd look for Sam English and Jackson Burtwhistle to step up against Hopkins and take over this game.
All right, Hudson, let's move over to the other side of the ball now. This SU defense has been pretty effective this season, surpassing a lot of expectations for the unit. Now, a top 10 scoring defense. What's been making this unit click?
Well, it's the return of Riley Figueres has been incredibly important for this team because Riley Figueres being on the main attacker in each game has been fantastic. He's shifted where he's supposed to. He switches when he needs to. He guards well. But it's also a leap from Billy Dwan that we didn't necessarily expect to see year over year. I really like this Syracuse defense. The only questions I have, though, are limiting streaks. We saw a big streak from High Point in the second quarter of that game just over the weekend. And then we saw another big streak in games earlier. We've seen this all year long. Can they lock it down? And can Will Marks step up? Because he's had a down year too, right?
Well, I think Will Marks had somewhat of a down year because his defense hasn't done him a ton of favors at times. I think Carter Rice lost a lot of guys when it came to getting into the 5 yards and in. And you praised Riley Figueres, and I think he's had a very good season. But against Jackson Overby, it was really not that great. He lost him at many points, and it was not great.
All right, well, now in his 3rd season at the helm, the story with head coach Gary Gate is becoming all too familiar. Gate holds a 4-18 record against ranked opponents. What's unfortunate is many of those losses have been like ones we've seen so far this season, Ryan. It's close games where the Orange just miss an opportunity for a statement win.
Yeah, I mean, they go 1 of 5 on man-up opportunities against Army. The key is you can't let the game go down to those final moments. Syracuse led 10-7 over Army. They led 11-9 over Maryland. You got to close out the games in the second half. These other teams that you're playing against, when you do not score in a sudden death overtime, you are going to get beat. That's just what happens. And it's really unfortunate that we see this, but they got to do more work early in the game so they don't get into those late overtimes. And they've got to finish when they get their chances.
And it's especially against those ranked opponents. You see on your screen right now, 4-18 against ranked opponents, 13-1 against unranked opponents. It's when they play good players and they play good defenses, they struggle in overtime because good teams know what to do with Joey Spallina. It goes back to Joey Spallina. They know how to handle him, and when it gets to overtime and you don't have other guys stepping up, it's a massive issue for this team going forward. And obviously Gary Gates only in his 3rd season, but with the expectations that are put on the Syracuse men's lacrosse team because of the history, which we'll talk about in a few moments, that is why you need big wins in this spot. That's why this Johns Hopkins game matters so much.
Well, one thing's for sure, Gary Gate will have a massive opportunity with number 2, Johns Hopkins, on his plate on Saturday. It's time for our first break here on Cuse Countdown. When we come back, we go into the nest and meet the Blue Jays. Don't go anywhere. CC back after this. Caleb Nice, Hudson Ridley, and Ryan Bridges with you. Cuse Countdown rolls on. Let's flip the page now and talk Johns Hopkins. The Blue Jays 5-1 after the first 6 games for the first time since 2014. Win number 5 was a bit of a roller coaster, though a matchup with number 2 Virginia. The Cavaliers led 10-8 at the half before Hopkins scored 6 of the final 8 goals and came away with the win. Hudson, the first win against an opponent second in the nation or higher since 2019. The Blue Jays catching fire at the right time.
Exactly, and we saw at the beginning of the season against number 1 Denver, they really held pace in that game and only lost in overtime. This is another thing we saw with Virginia. When they got down, they went tit for tat with the Cavaliers. That's something that is hard to do against a high-powered offense, but they also slowed them down. They held Peyton Cormier, one of UVA's best players, to just 2 goals in that game. He's a guy that when Syracuse plays UVA later in the season, he's a guy to look for. So it was an impressive defensive performance out of a team that we know is good defensively, and we'll touch on that. But the offense showed up too with 16 goals, Ryan.
I mean, this is a barn burner in the first half. 8-8 with 9 minutes to go in the second half. I mean, that is on pace for 20 goals plus from either team.
Good math.
And these teams, right, they were able to help out their goalies later on. Matt Moons, Chase Erlin, they really stepped up. Chase Erlin had 1 save in the first quarter. He had 10 in the second and third. They really picked it up on the defensive side of the ball, and that's what won them this game.
Sounds like one thing is clear. Hopkins is back. That's been one of the main narratives this season. So let's talk about the man in charge, Peter Milliman, because he says a lot of people don't want to see his team back. The 4th-year Hopkins head coach said earlier this season, everyone's got an opinion when you're Hopkins. There's plenty of people who want to see us go 0-13. But Ryan, Milliman steered his team back to the top in the college lacrosse world. You can't deny what he's been doing there.
It's been pretty impressive, and I don't blame a lot of people for not wanting him back. All those national championships, that's not a team that anyone wants to see. They've been really used to the Syracuse and Hopkins rivalry, and you'll see what we're talking about in just a little bit. It's been a crazy ride for this Hopkins team. It's a lot like Gary Gate. I mean, this Hopkins team, Peter Milliman, his first season, he gets 4 wins. And then in his second season, he's close to 500. Third season, they make the tournament. Is that a preview for Syracuse? We'll see, Hudson. But Peter Milliman has brought Hopkins back to a respectable manner.
I love your comparison in this spot to Gary Gate, because Gary Gate is trying to do a similar thing of bringing a program back that isn't necessarily dead, but also at the same time has seen much better days, and both of these programs fit in that same bucket. The only difference is Milliman has done this completely under the radar. It's been a slow build. Last year, you wouldn't have even considered Hopkins to be a solidified top 8, top 7 team, and now they are well in that mark, sitting at number 2. It's been very impressive what Milliman has done this season.
Well, winning is easier when you've got a duo like Milliman has on your team. Jacob Angelis and Garrett Degnan have been getting it done all season for Hopkins. Angelis has been the facilitator all season for the Blue Jays, 14 assists and a team-high 27 points, guys. In that same flock, Degnan can't stay away from the twine. 16 goals on the year for the Blue Jays. Hudson, any chance the Orange can kill 2 birds with 1 stone?
I mean, hey, like what you did there, it's going to be virtually impossible to do that because not only is Angelis good at passing, he can just sit at X all day and find Degnan. He does even more because he's only 3 goals behind Degnan with 13 on the season. He can do both things, and then Garrett Degnan is massive. 6'4", 215 pounds, Ryan. Could you imagine Riley Figueres trying to guard that? He's a little bit of a smaller guy on the shorter side. It'd be a rough matchup, and I think that's how it could go on Saturday.
I mean, it's a lot like Malik Brown trying to guard PJ Hall, over the week. But look, I mean, both of these guys will move off the ball so well. We mentioned how Joey Spallina and Christian Muley always have to move up the ball and keep guys moving. That's what worked a lot for Johns Hopkins against Virginia, and you saw this Hopkins team come alive in that 4th quarter. It really helped them after they struggled in the middle part of that game. Look for these two to link up, especially in the big moments. These are their guys right here.
All right, well, one thing these two teams have in common, goalies that are very experienced and can take control of the game. Syracuse, of course, with graduate student Will Mark between the pipes. For Hopkins is Chase Erlin, a guy Milliman brought over from Cornell, whom he recruited with his time with the Big Red. Erlin backstopped Cornell all the way to the NCAA championship game in 2022. What are you keeping an eye on between these two, Ryan?
Who is going to keep the nerves down? Who is going to keep everything in check? You mentioned Erlin has been in the biggest moments. He's played in the biggest game, so you trust him. But that's something that Will Mark talked about after the High Point win. I got to just settle everything down. You never really know how things are going to go. There's always going to be runs, right? Syracuse, they start out 7-0 against High Point. Then all those goals start to come in. But you got to keep your confidence throughout the whole game and make sure you don't make any of those big mistakes, right? Ball goes top corner, there's not much you can do there. But don't let any balls bounce off your feet. Always be in the right spots and always be in the right position.
Exactly, and both of these guys are very experienced. They're both 5-year starters. Erlin, a grad transfer from Cornell. Last season, though, Tim Marcille for Hopkins had only allowed 9 goals and had 21 saves. He completely outplayed Will Mark, so I think going into this game, there's a chance that Mark has a little bit more of a chip on his shoulder, also considering that he struggled so far this season. Under 45% save rate against top 5 teams so far this season. He's done well against other opponents with a 65% clip against those teams, but so far, Ryan, this season it's been a little bit rough for him.
Well, Saturday marks just one chapter in a whole novel between Syracuse and Johns Hopkins. It'll be the 62nd all-time meeting between the two. And what better way to catch you up than a little history lesson? All the way back in 1883, 21st President Chester A. Arthur woke up in the White House like always. But some 40 miles north, it wasn't just any normal day. On the campus of Johns Hopkins University, a group of students came together and created the university's first lacrosse team. The rest was history. Johns Hopkins Lacrosse was born. And since the 1880s, Hopkins has been synonymous with lacrosse, weaving the very fabric of the sport's history. And since then, the Blue Jays have won 44 national titles, including 9 since men's lacrosse became an NCAA sport. Only Syracuse holds more. The Blue Jays have a rich history of excellence and tradition. Hopkins has produced numerous All-Americans, National Players of the Year, and Hall of Famers. For some, it makes coming back an easy choice. Take Dave Petramalo, who won a championship as a standout defenseman with Hopkins. Then in 05 and 07, Petramalo won national championships as the Blue Jays head coach. That 2005 chip made Petramalo the first and only person so far in the sport's history to win a D1 national championship as a player and head coach. But in the last 14 seasons, the Blue Jays' wings aren't flapping like they once were. Hopkins has made just the Final Four once. Nothing like the 80s, Hudson.
We start in the 80s, where helmets looked like that, and Syracuse men's lacrosse wasn't the premier power it once turned into. That was until 1983, when the Orange made their first national championship in program history. Who did they meet? Well, Johns Hopkins, of course. SU took home its first national championship with a narrow 17-16 win. Before that point, the Orange had dropped 9 straight matchups with the Blue Jays. That's dating all the way back to 1930. The next year, Syracuse made it back to the mountaintop with its second national championship appearance. However, this time, Hopkins not only took down the Orange, but followed it up the next season with another national championship over SU in 1985. After a 3-year hiatus, both sides would meet again in 1989 for the 4th and final national championship matchup of the decade. The Orange were led by a familiar name, Gary Gates. It took another 1-goal win, knotting the championship series at 2 apiece and laying the groundwork for a rivalry that would burn long after the 80s.
Johns Hopkins and Syracuse dominated the 80s and 90s. And while there was more parity in college lacrosse in the 2000s and 2010s, the playoff matchups didn't stop just there. Starting at the turn of the century, the two met in the NCAA semifinal. With 2.5 minutes to go, the teams knotted at 12. Mike Springer got a pass from Ryan Powell and fired the ball past Brian Carcaterra for the go-ahead goal. Hopkins knocked out Syracuse in 03, and the Orange returned the favor in 04 and 06. However, the defining moment of the decade came in 2008 when the Blue Jays and the Orange matched up in the national championship. SU trailed 5-3 in the second quarter before going on a 5-goal run, which propelled them to the title. Jays head coach Dave Petromala said it was the defining moment and turning point in the game. The Cuse pulled off the incredible turnaround from missing the tournament in 2007. Johns Hopkins got its revenge in 2015, but that brings us to where we are now. The two titans of college lacrosse haven't had a top 10 matchup since 2016, but that all changes today.
Hopefully that didn't make you too dizzy. When we come back, we're talking weather forecast. Cuse Countdown back after the break.
Leaving hot coals improperly extinguished can cause a wildfire.
Hey guys, it's Smokey!
It looks as if Smokey is going to use the drown, stir, drown and feel technique. After the first drown, a good start. Next, another drink. And finally, a close feel.
Is it cool? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Smokey, catch! Oh, my bad, Smokey.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Visit aarp.org/caregiving for information on how to provide even better care for the person who wants.
Welcome back to Cuse Countdown here in our CitrusTV studio. Caleb Nice with Hudson Ridley and Ryan Bridges. We're going away from sports to weather. Only you two will be meteorologists today because you know what they say, 2 is a party, but 3 is a cloud.
Ooh, kind of brutal. Kind of brutal.
All right, so I'll give you guys some upcoming games for Syracuse, and you'll provide the forecast for each opponent. Our first team here, we're going to the near future, just a week away, a matchup with Delaware, a team the Orange have only faced 3 times before, all 3 going SU's way. Hudson, do we see something similar on the horizon?
Okay, Caleb, you're going to have to hear me out with this forecast here. I'm seeing cloudy, but with a chance of the president, Ryan. Now, hear me out.
What does that mean?
Now, I will explain. Okay, so cloudy because
Right.
Delaware, they're just outside the top 20 at this point. They've had their ups and downs. They only lost to a Penn team that beat Duke by 1 goal, and their other loss is to Michigan. The president, where that comes in, Joe Biden, where did he go? Delaware undergrad, Syracuse Law School. Where do these two teams play? Chantilly, Virginia. How far away is Chantilly, Virginia from Washington, D.C.? Like half an hour. I'm not crazy here. I might be crazy, but I'm not.
It's going to be hard to one-up that. I don't really know how to follow that up, but I'm going to go with foggy for this game. It's really hard to see what's going to be going on in that field, especially because you mentioned it. Delaware's only losses to Penn, to Michigan, which are ranked 13th and 14th in the poll right now. So they've only lost to some really good teams. Syracuse struggles against good teams, and they're just outside that top 25. We know the history there, so I think it's going to be foggy. It's going to be a little tough for our satellites to see exactly what's going to happen.
It sounds like we're a little eerie with the Blue Hens. So our second forecast, Ryan, a week and a half away in the final home game of the season, a matchup with current number 6 Duke. I know you can't get weather in a dome, but let's just pretend.
I mean, in Syracuse, right, the snow builds up in the wintertime. And after a while, if it sits on a roof, it sits on a mountain, it creates an avalanche. And you better get your earmuffs when that happens as well. Because this game is going to be very close.
Look at that.
For Syracuse and Duke. It's going to be very close for a little while. And then Brendan O'Neill, that amazing offense that Duke has, it's going to create an avalanche and everything is going to go sliding down the mountain for Syracuse. I could see a massive Duke run halfway through this one, and I think things kind of go haywire.
Well, Ryan, I'm not far away from you in the weather slope, but obviously meteorologists have to disagree every once in a while. I have Syracuse falling into a bit of a blizzard in this game where the offense sadly freezes. I mean, at this point, we see them in big games underperform on the offensive end. In games against ranked teams, or unranked teams this season rather, they have over 18 goals a game. In games against ranked teams, they average under 14 a game. That's something you just can't see against good teams like that. And for that vein, if you get me back here on camera, I'm putting on a pair of ski goggles here for you guys, just to show you how I'm preparing for this.
We are ready
blizzard.
for whatever's going to happen between Syracuse and Duke. I can tell you that.
Surely.
Both of you keep the gear on. I like the look right now. Our third and final forecast, Hudson. It's a battle for the Krause-Simmons Trophy, a matchup with Hobart. What's the outlook for SU?
Well, at this point, I am taking a break from my little winter vacation here, and I'm going to the summer. It's a beach day. Hobart, at this point, has no implication on what Syracuse can do as a team. Since 1980, Hobart, Ryan, guess what they are? They're 32-4 against Syracuse. Who cares? This is a put your feet up kind of beach day. At this point, there's no way Syracuse loses this game.
Yeah, the Krause-Simmons Trophy is not switching hands, Hudson. I'm going a little bit different for my next one. This type of weather phenomenon only happens in the desert. I'm going with a dust devil for this game. Yes, maybe Hobart might make this a game because these teams know each other well and they play each other every year, but they're going to stir up a little dust devil. It will spin around for a while. They'll keep themselves in the game, but eventually every dust devil eventually subsides and it goes away, Hudson.
You better not open that. You know that's bad luck. There we go. All right, well, we predicted weather basically for an entire month. No other station has given you guys that. One last break here on CC. When we come back, we give our final predictions. Don't go anywhere. Cuse Countdown back after this.
Did you hear about the pony with a sore throat? He was a little horse. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why couldn't the Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Where do cats go on vacation? New York.
Look at you. You're at the top of your game. You're unstoppable. Nothing can throw you off track. Wait, is that your car? Uh-oh. Yeah, I saw that coming. That will throw you off track. You're looking at around 10 grand in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Let's try this again. Smart move. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Cuse Countdown continues. Hudson Ridley, Ryan Bridges, and Caleb Nice previewing everything you need to know for Syracuse and Johns Hopkins this weekend. We've got spring break coming up. A team that hasn't been able to catch a break, Syracuse, 2 overtime top 10 losses, brutal. But now Hopkins, another chance for a top 10 win. How do the Orange get it done?
They need to pass the ball, because at this point, when Joey Spallina isn't getting help passing, the whole offense falls apart. If it's reliant on him, he's not a takeover kind of scorer. They need to move the ball around and get good shots on that.
I mean, they got to get Johnny Mullen to the X. They got to get him more than 50% of the touches. You might think, oh, he's a freshman. He's won more faceoffs than Mason Cone. He is better at that faceoff dot than Mason Cone. Give him the chance in the big game. It may give you some extra possessions, and it may give you the win ultimately.
All right, let's take a look at those rankings and see just kind of where the rest of the season is shaking up for Syracuse. Ryan, what do you see there?
I mean, the rankings in college lacrosse, right? It's very different because all these teams play each other throughout the entire season, so they're all gonna play each other. If you lose a lot of games, it doesn't mean a whole lot.
Only 2 teams that haven't lost games too, Denver and Army. They're both in the top 3.
All right, Hudson, so what's your prediction between Syracuse and Johns Hopkins?
Syracuse and Johns Hopkins, give me the Blue Jays 15-12. Syracuse won't keep up.
14-12 Hopkins, their defense is too good.
All right, I'll be the odd man out. I'm going Syracuse gets it done, a 12-11 win for the Orange. That's going to do it for Cuse Countdown. Orange and Blue Jays coming up on Saturday. For the three of us, I'm Caleb Nice saying so long, and thanks for tuning in.